Welcome back to Season 5 of the True Blue Conversations podcast with your host, Adam Bloom. G'day, podcasters. Before we get underway with True Blue Conversations, just wanted to give a huge shout out to our friend and sponsor, the Warrior U podcast, hosted by Bram Connolly. Bram is a former Special Forces commander, best-selling author, popular podcast host, and human optimization pioneer. He has an authentic style and the unique ability to not only motivate, but also take people on a journey of self-discovery. Through the Warrior U podcast, Bram interviews guests in a bid to explore all things human optimization, resilience, leadership, and coffee. His book, The Commando Way, A Special Forces Commander's Lessons for Life, Leadership and Success, is available now on amazon.com.au. So from Adam Bloom and all of us here at True Blue Conversations, a big shout out to the Warrior U podcast, Bram Connolly, and his new book, The Commando Way, out now.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. Today, I have a very, very special guest coming to you from all the way from the United States. This lady is amazing in what she has done throughout her career, and she is an A-10 fighter pilot, and this has taken a while to set up, but I'm so excited to have this lady on to share her amazing story. And I'm joined today by Kim Campbell DFC, and she had an amazing career serving throughout Afghanistan, Iraq, and all over the globe, and she's joined us today to talk about her life in service and her life after service. And Kim, thank you for joining us on the show. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to have you on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're welcome. So before we get into your career, Kim, let's go back to a young Kim. And can you tell us a little bit about you as a younger Kim? What was life like? School, family, hobbies? Yeah, just give us a little bit of background about you.
Yeah, I grew up in California in the Bay Area. And my dad was a lawyer. My mom was an oncology nurse. So I kind of grew up in this little bit of a family of service. My dad had served in the Air Force. And I have a younger brother who's 8 years younger than me. So had some time as an only child. But soon thereafter, my brother came along. But I think, growing up, I loved the outdoors. I loved to play sports. My dad would take me backpacking. I was a cross-country runner. I played soccer. Just really into kind of that outdoor lifestyle. A lot of fun times with my family, doing those things. And I think that probably is kind of what eventually set me on a path towards service, was just knowing that I love to do some of those things. I always loved a good challenge. As a little bit, I haven't been back to California in a long time, but that's where I grew up. That's where I spent the good majority of my time before joining the Air Force.
So you mentioned that your dad had served. Was that a driving factor for you to want to join, or was it something else in you that just you wanted a challenge, or what was it?
I didn't know about my dad's time in service at all until I started talking to him about going to the Air Force Academy. And that was when I was 10 years old. For me, I actually was watching the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger, which, if you recall, it was, it was really sad in terms of it ended up in a terrible tragedy. But I think in that moment, even at 10, I realized the astronauts died doing something that they believed in and something that was big and important, more important than themselves. And for whatever reason, at 10 years old, I connected with that. And I just decided, well, that's what I want to go do, is I want to become an astronaut. So talked to my parents as I would do as a kid. And my dad said, many of those astronauts were pilots, and many of the pilots went to the Air Force Academy. So, that might be a path you would consider. I don't think my poor dad knew that I would actually go through with it, because I think my dad, I was his little girl, this was just, I think it was hard for him to actually see me start moving towards that path, even though he gave me the idea, because I think he knew how hard it could be.
So you mentioned that you wanted to be an astronaut. So that was what really drew you to joining the Air Force. And at that time, Kim, what year are we talking that you joined the Air Force? Because it being back in, I'm guessing in the 90s, but things were a little bit different in the US military services back then, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, so my decision was in 1986, right? And women weren't allowed to be fighter pilots. I had no idea because to me, once my dad told me that, I was like, right, I'm going to go to the Air Force Academy. I'm going to become a fighter pilot and then someday ideally go on to become an astronaut. So I had no idea that women weren't allowed to be fighter pilots. My dad, my parents, nobody ever told me that. They just kind of said, well, work hard, go after what you want. And, I finally kind of figured it out in high school. I think I was in a speech and debate class and we're doing, women in combat. And I was like, wait a second, like this policy doesn't allow me to be a fighter pilot. Thankfully, it changed in 1993, which was the year I graduated high school. And so, times have changed. We're still pretty low in numbers. Women at the time I was about one of 35 female fighter pilots in the entire Air Force out of 3,500 fighter pilots. So numbers were definitely small. We're growing, but still small numbers.
So you joined, you talk about sort of, that's the first setback that you had when you joined. So tell me, you joined in 1997 and what were the challenges or more challenges that you faced throughout your time at the academy?
Well, my biggest challenge was getting into the Air Force Academy. It's all good to have dreams and goals, but it turns out sometimes they don't always turn out and go the way you planned. And despite working really hard in school, the academy was very competitive, and I got an initial rejection letter from the Air Force Academy. That was probably my biggest challenge, was just getting in. I thankfully got a late offer of appointment to attend the Air Force Academy. And then, 4 years at a very difficult school, challenging academically, military, athletics, it's all, trying to do it all and be good at it. It was a challenge, but at the same time, I feel like that rejection kind of gave me this motivation to prove everybody wrong. Like, it was that I wanted to prove that I belong there. And so I went out and I wasn't just going to survive. I wanted to excel. And that motivation propelled me through. I ended up graduating at the top of my class. And, I think if I hadn't been rejected, maybe my story would have been a little bit different, but it certainly gave me motivation.
Well, I can see you, Kim, across from and you look like a very determined. If you set your mind to something, it's get out of my way and until I get this done. So
I don't like to be told no. That's for sure.
Well, that's a good thing to have, like that, because most people. Some people hear no and then stop, and like they stop on their dream, and if you had have. Thinking back now, Kim, if you had a thought that way, you probably wouldn't have gone on and had the distinguished career that you have went on to have. And I think that's a really great point to touch on, is that, yeah, like sometimes if anyone listens to this, if someone says no, just find another avenue. And if it's what you truly want to do, make it happen.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes we're really hard on ourselves when we hear no, or we face a failure or rejection, and it is crushing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would, like, in the moment, it was devastating when I opened up that letter. But the other piece of this is I was surrounded by really incredible mentors, parents, people who were like, hey, if this is what you want, don't quit. And so in many ways, that lesson happening very early in my life was a good thing. Painful, but a good thing.
Absolutely. And so talk me through 1997. Talk me through what was happening in the US military, because, we'd had the Gulf Wars. Was the US military in a bit of a holding pattern at that when you first joined?
Yeah, certainly. I would say more of a peacetime military. It was the kind of thing we graduated. And, there were no major conflicts. It was we knew obviously combat was a very real possibility, but it wasn't like there was some major threat looming that we were all talking about. It was just you're right, kind of a holding pattern where, we're flying missions in Operation Southern Watch and Northern Watch, and just a little bit more, I'll say that, not to jump ahead, but like when people were talking about, for me, when I went to pilot training and looking at choosing the A-10, I think there were a lot of people like, why do you want that airplane? Like, don't you want like one of those sleek, sexy fighters that's out there potentially doing air to air, covering the skies? And I'm like, no, it's not really for me. But that's kind of what the environment was at the time. Like there just wasn't that, it's like, I think they looked at it like, you may never go do anything in that airplane, is kind of what they were insinuating.
Well, unfortunately, that was how wrong they were, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I want to talk about that because, in regards to you becoming a pilot, you're not like you weren't designated as an A-10 pilot. Can you talk me through the process of what was the love of the A-10 for you, and eventually you would rack up 1,800 hours in an A-10. So talk me through that process.
Yeah, so I think it's you get to pilot training, and I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot. So that was already out there, but I didn't know what I wanted to fly. And the more I talked to other pilots and listened to them talk about their missions, and when people started sharing this mission of close air support with me, I was like, that's a mission I can get behind, right? Like that just seemed really important. It's this idea that our mission is to bring people home to get to their families. And it just seemed like a mission that was incredibly important, and one that I was passionate about. At the same time, during pilot training, we flew different types of missions, and I realized that I really liked the low-level missions. They were a lot of fun. The air-to-air kind of formation missions, yeah, they were cool, but it wasn't really my thing. So it just was like a logical airplane for me to choose. The other side of this is my husband was also in the Air Force. He was already an A-10 pilot. And so I knew a lot about the airplane, and we were looking for a path where we could stay together and be assigned to locations together. We weren't sure that it was the best idea for us both to fly the same airplane because there was no husband-wife that had done that before. And so it was a little uncertain of how they were going to treat us or what they would do. So there were a lot of factors that went into it, but the bottom line, it was the love for the mission that really pulled me towards the A-10 more than anything.
And they're a pretty cool looking plane, actually. I think they're cool.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty badass. So, I mean, there is that.
Absolutely. And so how do you get designated to, so obviously you go through your training, and then how is it announced, hey, Kim, you're going to the A-10s? Like, do they have a special night, or how does it work?
So we put in a dream sheet, essentially, 1 to, 5, 6, whatever it was for all the fighters. And then there were some instructor pilot things as well. So we put in our dream sheet, and it was very much how well you performed. I mean, the number one in the class gets their first choice, and also what's available. It is about performing. You've got to perform if you want to get what you want. And it is a big party. We have an assignment night at what we used to call the Officers Club, and we would go, and obviously there's lots of drinks involved and a big celebration. But they would call us up on stage, and you would have your back to a display, and they would cycle different pictures of different airplanes, and then they would stop on your airplane. So the whole crowd would see what you got before you did. And so people would cheer, and you kind of turn around and see. So it would be, they'd call you up and tell you what you were assigned. So it was a big, exciting night. I mean, it was a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. And for you got what you wanted. So you got the A-10, and I reckon that would be an amazing feeling for you. And I want to talk about your call sign, because your call sign is Killer Chick. Who gave you this, and how did you receive? How was that received by you?
So we get our call signs. You get a few different call signs throughout your career, but the one call sign that really matters is once you are in your airplane. So for me, the A-10. And I was designated as combat mission ready, meaning that I was cleared to deploy with the unit. I had gone through a series of upgrade rides with my unit, and they decided, they designated me as combat mission ready. So once that happens, we have a big, what we call a naming ceremony. So there were several of us, maybe, 5 or 6 new wingmen in the squadron. We got checked off as combat mission ready. We have a big night. Here's the trend. It's in a bar on a Friday night. Also drinks involved. But the funny thing is you're not in the room when they talk about you. And so they tell stories about you, things that you've done while you've been flying. So you never really know. You're outside the room, you walk back in. And I remember I walk back in, everybody's cheering. and screaming, yelling, and, having a good time. And they're like, your new call sign is KC. And I'm like, that's so lame. That's my initials. Now, I did not say that out loud. I just kind of nodded like, all right. And then they said it stands for killer chick. And I was like, okay, that's at least that I can get on board with. Being the only woman in a fighter squadron, I felt like it was very much a sign of respect from my fellow pilots, that I had earned my way into that community. So yeah. And then once you fly in combat, that's it. It's with you for life, unless you maybe do something else stupid. But, for me, that's been my call sign from the very, very beginning.
Well, it's when you first sent me through your bio, I saw that and went, KC. Okay, cool. That's your initials. And no, and then when you actually said, no, it means this, I went, oh, okay. Yeah, right. So but it's cool. I mean, it's a cool, and like you say, respect from your peers and eventually, so with that, Kim, was there, like, you were the first female in your A-10 squadron. Did that change over the years as, like, going forward?
A little bit. I started, and really finished as one of the only women in the A-10 community, but it has increased over time. And, there are squadrons now, I've seen pictures of, 4 or 5 women in a fighter squadron. So it really depends on the location, on the fighter. But the numbers really have drastically improved. I think we're something at 150, don't quote me on the numbers, total female fighter pilots, going up from about 30. So, like I said, still small numbers, but the numbers are growing.
Yeah, I recently had an English friend of mine who she was the first Chinook crew chick. So, and now the numbers, as they've gone on throughout the years, she's seen an increase and she's proud of, but she was one of the originals, and it was just like, to talk to her as well, just to say it's great to see females knowing that they can do it as well, and like, it's something that they are proud of in their own right as well, and so should you be.
The guys from my very first squadron, I'm still in touch with them today. I mean, we deployed together, we went to combat together. And I think there's just a bond that you share during those moments. I mean, they looked out for me. They were truly brothers for me. I mean, I think they just cared that I was credible and capable in the airplane. I mean, the jet doesn't know the difference. And so the fact that I can perform in the airplane, I prove myself in combat, I think the conversation's over. Like, for me, I don't want to say one of the guys. I mean, I was still a woman in a fighter squadron, but I was definitely accepted for my credibility and capability in the airplane.
Well, it's, as you say, it's you doing your job. Like, you now, the plane doesn't know that there's a female. You're just another operator doing your job, and that's exactly right. Good point.
And I will tell you that I think most of the guys on the ground just care that there's an A-10 overhead. They don't really care who's flying it. So.
Exactly. So talk me through. So everyone's watched Top Gun back in the day, and is it as real as, like, what we see on TV, like on the movies, Kim, or is it totally different?
It's the flying is a little bit exaggerated, but I think what I love, especially about the newest Top Gun, I love to see the camaraderie and kind of the humor, the pushing each other, like making jokes. I mean, I think that's very real in many ways, that competitive nature. And you get the different personalities in a fighter squadron. So to me, that's the fun part. The flying, it's entertaining, right? We're there to be entertained. So we'll just leave it at that.
Absolutely. No, I thought I'd throw that in because I've had a few pilots on, and they just go, yeah, it's nothing like that's Hollywood. That's Hollywood. So
yeah, very much Hollywood in many, many ways. But I love the movie, so I mean, I can't complain.
Absolutely. So talk me through the feeling of the very first time that you went up on your own, and now this is go time. Kim's like, no more training. You're in the air for the first time. Talk me through that feeling.
The first time you fly the A-10, there's a single seat airplane, like there is nobody else. And so back in the day, there was 1 2-seater airplane, but that's it. You're solo. You have another instructor. He's tucked in right behind you, so they can watch and really see just about everything that you're doing just based on their instruments. But The first time it's you. And so you hope that all your training, everything that you've done leading up to this point is going to serve you well. But I remember just taking off for the first time in the A-10, and, we're not a super fast airplane. I'll put that out there, but still, totally exhilarating. Little like get airborne and be like, I am finally flying the A-10, right? How cool is that? And then it's like, then it's over, right? Then you just focus on your mission and focus on what you're doing. But you're not really an A-10 pilot until you shoot the gun for the first time. So the first flight is cool. It's exciting. You flew the A-10, but we don't give out our A-10 patches until you've been out to your first range ride where you shoot the gun. That is a completely different experience because shooting the gun in the A-10. Now, keep in mind, the A-10 was built around a 30 millimeter Gatling gun. The gun itself is 19 feet long. It's essentially centered up on the airplane, so point and shoot weapon. But you're sitting on top of the gun. I mean, that's the reality of it. So when the gun fires, it shakes the airplane. You can smell the gun gases. You can see it. Like it's a full body experience. And then you ideally see your bullets hit the target, which in training you get little sparkles. It's not all that exciting, but it means you hit the target. So really cool to shoot the gun for the first time, and just an incredible airplane, incredible weapon. And then you land, you get your A-10 patch, and now you're actually an A-10 pilot.
So for people who aren't aware, Kim, can you talk us through the process? How many hours do you need in the air to say, okay, Kim, you're now deployable. You can now go and deploy?
Yeah, it depends. We do about 6 months of training in the A-10. It's changed over time, but we'll do about 6 months of training at our training unit. And then from there, we were shipped to our base, which was in North Carolina, at the 75th Fighter Squadron. And so that was my first assignment. And then you go through an additional checkout. So you're talking maybe 100 hours in the airplane, about when you're deemed combat mission ready.
100 hours, Kim. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on the numbers. I should probably look it up, but it's a lot of hours, but not a lot of hours, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I know because I was originally in earth moving before I went across to being a firefighter, and I just think 100 hours, Kim, like like I just think machine wise, I did thousands of hours in machines to get to become a proficient operator, and I just think, wow, 100 hours, God, yeah, righto, Kim, off you go.
Well, but you're a wingman, right? You're in there with somebody else that is going to make decisions. Your job is to be in position, be on the radio, provide that mutual support, look out for threats. But the reality is your flight lead is doing a lot of the work. And so, that's what they're looking for, is somebody that can do that part well.
So talk me through, as you mentioned, we're in a holding pattern in 97 when you join, and then September 11, everyone knows where they were, and that day it's a day that changed history of the world. Where were you on that day, and what do you remember of that day?
I was actually in A-10 training at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. It was night flying for us, and so I was asleep for night crew rest. And I remember the phone rang, and I was thinking, of course, well, who's interrupting my pilot rest? And, but I'm going to answer it because it doesn't ring very often. And it was one of my other classmates, and he said, Kim, turn on the TV. And I did. I turned on the TV and actually watched the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And I think at that moment for me, I knew we were under attack. This is now the second airplane. This is not an accident. And I think it was, we knew at some point we were likely going to war. It was just this reality all of a sudden that hit, that our lives were about to change forever. As an Air Force officer, as a pilot, they immediately put the base on lockdown. They called us all in, and I think for many of us, it was very personal because we had instructors and students whose parents worked in the Pentagon or were airline pilots. And it was a lot of kind of watching and waiting initially. We didn't know what was going to happen. We're in training, so we know, we're maybe not going to be the first out the door. But the reality is this was September. I finished A-10 training in December. And in 2002, I deployed to Afghanistan. So, you're talking about this is the importance of training, right? You never think that, or at least I didn't, at the time, it was like, I didn't even think of something like, you just can't fathom something like that happening. But the reality is you have to be ready for those moments. You have to, it's why we put in the work and training so that you're ready when those things happen.
It's something that, as you say, like you were attacked, like, and you guys were attacked, and it was, it changed. Like, Kim, I was 8 at the time, and I couldn't fathom what I was seeing until years later. And I just, like, for you, being it was your home, like your home country, like, I can understand why it was, no, this is personal for us. We, we want to, we need to strike back here. And talk me through the early deployment in 2002, because a lot of people, it started, the war ramped up later on as when you were there, but in that early time of Afghanistan, talk me through that process.
So our squadron deployed initially to Kuwait to support Operation Southern Watch. And as things kind of heated up in Afghanistan, they decided to move A-10s forward into Bagram Air Base. And so we would send about half of our unit went over to Afghanistan. And I remember that was my first combat mission. We were flying combat support missions in Southern Watch, and flying over to my first combat mission in Afghanistan. There's part of me that was like, excited's not the right word. It was just like, finally, I'm going to do what I've been trained to do. And there is a need for us to be there. And everybody wanted to be part of that. It was like, if there are guys on the ground that need our help, we want to be there with them. And so, obviously, first combat mission, not the easiest of missions, flying from Kuwait to Afghanistan, multiple refuelings along the way, a lot of pressure, and getting into Afghanistan. I remember crossing the border and just thinking, all right, this is it. Like, all that training, you better be good at what you do right now. We ended up doing just a convoy escort mission on our first mission in, but, landing at Bagram, being in what I would say is a very austere environment, especially for Air Force officers and Air Force pilots. We're not used to those conditions, but I will tell you, it didn't matter for us. Like, hanging out with the ground troops that we were supporting, living out of tents, like, it was exactly where we were supposed to be and exactly where we were meant to be. We felt very confident in our mission and our purpose. And it was just, I think everybody wanted to be there. We wanted to be a part of that and supporting the operations. Now, they were fairly quiet for us at that time. Operation Anaconda had preceded that, which was obviously heavy fighting and a lot of losses. But after that, we spent a lot of time just flying overhead, being there for our ground troops if anything happened. Very, very quiet, supporting special forces and their missions, but a very different environment. I think than we were expecting in many ways, but also just happy to be overhead and support our troops when they needed us.
So how long was that first deployment into Afghanistan for you?
I think at the time we were actually only on 3-month rotations, but because we were split operations, we would only spend about a month in Afghanistan. So really short time period.
So then you come back from Afghanistan, and then in 2003 you deployed to Iraq, and your first time into Iraq. Talk me through this deployment, and because this was very different to Afghanistan the year before.
Yes, I think as we started spinning up for Iraq, I think we knew it was going to be different. We knew it was different based on the threat level. Based on our intelligence reports of the surface-to-air threats. Also, we thought that there would be an air-to-air threat as well. And so our squadron commander made us all write letters home to our families. So if we didn't make it, there would be a letter that he could give to our families. And that really, talk about putting you in a reality check very quickly. Like, that was the kind of realization that this isn't Afghanistan. This is Iraq. It is very different. The threat level is different, and we need to be like on the top of our game.
So for you, Kim, did you have a different weapon system in Iraq to when you're in Afghanistan?
So still the A-10, but our weapons loadout was definitely different because of the threat, but also because of the targets were different. So just different target set, different weapons, but also based on the threat, we had electronic countermeasure pods that we didn't carry in Afghanistan. Initially we carried AIM-9 air-to-air missiles, ideally for defense in Iraq in the early days. So, just different mission set completely, different terrain, different rules of engagement. But for us, again, our squadron going was really important to us because we wanted to be there. If there were troops on the ground, then we wanted to be the ones there to support them.
So you mentioned that you had to write your letters and to home, and for someone because you were mid-20s by that stage, was you mid-20s?
27. Yeah, 27.
So that, yeah, that I'm thinking to that, like I'm only a couple of years older than that now, and to write that letter to say, hey, yep, this is, like that is mentally that's a different mindset, Kim. Like that's not normal.
No, it's not normal, but I think it was exactly what our unit needed to like give us that reality check. Like we came off like a high from Afghanistan and our performance, and we felt very good about what we did there. But I think our squadron commander also knew we needed to like humble down a bit and like really just be, have a very focused mindset about what we were going to do. And this was going to be different. And we needed to understand that it was going to be different.
Absolutely. And the mindset is, like you may not come back from this, and it's, switch you on to be, all right, guys, mission focused, but this is the reality. It's not training anymore. This is the reality. And talk me through your first flight over Baghdad. What do you remember of that?
It was an interesting for us because essentially we followed the ground troops. So as the ground troops moved forward to Baghdad, so did we. So initially our early missions were just across the border from Kuwait. And then we just kept moving further and further and further north. Seeing Baghdad, seeing the dark smoke from the oil fires, seeing this, sometimes you're out in the open desert to go into almost a very urban environment was very eye-opening. I think we knew from the briefings that we would eventually be doing close air support over downtown Baghdad. But I don't think we expected it to happen as quickly as it did. And I think it was a little bit eye-opening because we also knew from our intelligence briefs, like it was a pretty big threat area. We would call it the super MES, which was the super missile engagement zone, meaning there were a lot of surface to air threats. And I think it was just like, it was a little bit surreal to finally see it, to finally be right there in Baghdad. And, now we're, the target sets are different. We're talking weapons factories and things like that. There's, surface to air missiles that we can see now visually, which is a little scary as well. That's not something that you want to see. I think eye-opening might be the best word I can describe. Like, it's just, we talked about it. It's like you talk about something, you train for something, and then you actually see it. And it's like, okay, game on. Like you have to be at the top of your game to be the best at what you're doing, not just for you, but for your wingman as well.
So talk me through, Kim, the first time you pulled the trigger in Iraq, and what was that like? Finally, as you say, you did it in training. You're not an A-10 pilot till you pull the trigger, but what was it like actually in a war zone pulling the trigger for the first time?
I think we were so focused on our mission. I think the first weapon that I dropped was actually, I shot a Maverick missile. And, I think it was just, you're so focused on what you're doing. You fall back on the training of one, you don't want to screw it up. Troops on the ground need it. And I think it's just a realization of you're doing exactly what you were trained to do, which in our case was to support our troops on the ground and to take out weapons so that they didn't have to deal with them later. I think it was just a very mission-focused mindset at the time.
And so you didn't come through unscathed in
No.
Iraq, and I want to touch on this now on The 7th of April, 2003. Run me through this day and talk me through how you were mentally after what had happened.
Yeah. So April 7th was honestly, it was a day like every other day, right? We at this point in time, we're now flying all the way up to Baghdad. We're air refueling so that we can be fully loaded with gas before we go to a tasking. The unfortunate thing about April 7th was the weather wasn't great. That was about the big difference, as there were clouds covering all of Baghdad. In the A-10, we have to be able to see the ground. At the time, that was we needed to be able to see the ground to support our ground troops. And we weren't sure if we were going to be effective. And then we got a call that guys were taking fire. They needed immediate air support. And so now we're going to do everything we can to get below the weather to help them out. Thankfully, we didn't have a far distance to go. And in the interim, we're just talking about what we're going to do. We're going to get down below the weather and support our ground troops. So we dropped down below the weather, and immediately, like, eyes open for me. I mean, I can see the firefight. We're lower than we normally are, but I can see tracers and smoke, and it's very surreal because this is exactly what we train for, exactly what we plan for. Except now I start to see like these puffs of gray and white smoke, and now bright flashes in the air next to my cockpit. At the same time, we have a mission to do. So we are just very focused on supporting our ground troops. Our friendlies are on the west side of the Tigris River, enemies on the east side. They're firing rocket-propelled grenades into our troops, and we're going to get in there as quickly as we can to support them. So we do a couple passes. We kind of make a decision, have a conversation that high threat situation, we're being shot at, our friendlies are being shot at. We're going to get in there, do a couple passes, climb up, reassess. So I'm now on my last rocket pass, doing everything that I normally do. I roll in, fine tune my aim point, rockets come off, everything's normal. I pull away from the ground just to get away from the threat, climbing up to get my altitude and airspeed back. And then the loudest explosion at the back of the airplane. Like, I know immediately that I have been hit by enemy fire. The jet noses over. It's pointing down at Baghdad below. I pull back on the control stick just kind of instinctively, and absolutely nothing happens. And I know this is not good. So now the ground is getting closer. I know I might have to eject, and I immediately fall back on my training. I quickly try to analyze the situation. I've got, a master caution light that's flashing. My whole caution panel is lit up. I'm, frantically, just very quickly trying to check and figure out what's going on. And I catch that the hydraulic lights are all on, and the hydraulic gauges, which is how we fly an airplane, are at zero. So the whole system is completely depleted, and I'm now plunging to the ground, completely out of control. I remember looking down at my ejection handles and just thinking, like, not yet. Like, this is about the last thing that I want to do, is potentially eject into the hands of the enemy, right? Like, this is not going to go well. So I have really one other option at this point, and that's hope that the backup emergency system works. It's a switch. It's called manual reversion, and it allows us to fly the airplane without hydraulics. And I remember flipping that switch and pulling back on the stick, and the airplane now starts to climb up and away from Baghdad. That was kind of the first moment I was like, all right, I might actually get out of here alive. Life-changing, life-altering moment. And then I still have to get this very heavily damaged airplane home, right? Like, now I have an hour to get this airplane home, to fly this thing, hopefully get home. I still don't know at this point. Maybe I do have to eject. I don't know if it's going to make it. That trip home was definitely one of the longest hours of my life, because I didn't know if I was going to, quite honestly, if I was going to live or if I was going to die. I had to make a decision about trying to land the airplane or ejecting from it, get to friendly territory and eject. And hardest decision I've ever made. But I had an hour to fly the airplane, to really think it all through. And in my gut, I really felt like I could land the airplane. But landing that airplane was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Just the uncertainty, the risk. But I do remember coming back in, and for whatever reason, I also felt really like a sense of calm and a sense of confidence. Like, I can do this. I put in the work. I can do this. But coming it back in, I remember crossing the landing threshold about 60 feet above the ground, and just the airplane suddenly started this roll to the left. And I thought, am I going to crash? Is my airplane going to flip over on its back? Do I even have time to eject? I quickly yanked the stick back, and thankfully the airplane leveled out. And then just that 30 feet and that little bit of a prayer, like, please just let me make it, and 10 feet, just holding it steady, thinking I'm so close, just let me put this thing on the ground. And then landing and feeling such an immense feeling of relief. Like, I had made it, I had survived. Then I had to stop the airplane with another emergency braking system and get the airplane fully stopped and then get out to look at the damage. So never in my life did I think that I would have to do something like that. Or honestly, that I was capable. Like, I just think it's one of those things you don't know until you're there, and you hope that everything that you've put in, all the work that you've put in, will get you to that moment and that you can perform.
So for you, sorry, Kim, to cut you off, but like for you, your training, you reverted back to your training, all the years, all the time. But for you, going through that, do I eject? Do I put it down? Because at that stage, had there been much in the pre-deployment training of, well, what happens if you do get captured? Because you saw that, that if we've all seen it, where if you fall into enemy hands, was there much in around that of, well, what do you do? And how did you, like, obviously you made that decision to press on, and, as you say, it was the longest hour of your life, but mentally, like, was it just a split-second decision of, okay, I know I can get this back?
Well, I think over Baghdad, right? I absolutely knew, we had a lot of conversations in our survival training about the potential of getting captured and what do you do. I think, the idea was do not get captured, right? Certainly. And so ejecting wasn't something I ever wanted to do over Baghdad. I just didn't know if I was going to be able to control the airplane in that moment, or to get it under control, if the manual reversion system was going to be working. So there was no doubt in my mind at that moment that I didn't want to eject. I think the hard part for me was, do I get the jet back to friendly territory and eject there where I know it's safe, where I know our rescue helicopters will come and get me, in a safe space. That was an hour-long decision, and I agonized in many ways over the decision. Like, there was part of me that would just have my flight lead make the decision for me, right? Because then that's easier. But he empowered me to make that decision. He was like, Casey, you're flying a single-seat fighter. It's your decision. So I've got your back, no matter what you decide. Now, granted, he also was like, we bounced ideas off of each other. We talked about what was going on in the airplane. We did controllability checks. But in the end, after flying the airplane for an hour, I just felt very confident. I felt very good about my decision to land the airplane.
So at that moment, Kim, when you went to pull back and there was nothing, did you think, that's it? This is it. This is how my life ends? Or was there that thought hadn't crossed your mind?
I think there's a lot of thoughts that, like, I feel like time slowed down a little bit. Like, I think it was like, oh shit, like, that's exactly what I said on the radio too. It was like, this is not good. It's the realization of this is not good. But I also think it was just such a, like, I'm not going down with this airplane. Like, I'm going to get this thing back under control. I hope, there's like, at this point, I don't really know what's wrong with it. So I'm just, it was a little bit of shock of, like, what just happened? I know I've been hit. Why isn't my airplane not responding? And so it felt like time slowed down, but it was very quick in terms of analyzing everything. And then I don't really have many other options. I can pull the ejection handles, not a good option, or I can hope that the backup emergency system, I hope that it's intact, right? Because I don't know about the damage. I can't see it. So I'm just hoping that this switch is going to work. And thankfully it did.
Absolutely. Well, I think all of us are grateful that you're still here. It worked, and we can have this conversation because
absolutely.
And so you get on the ground, and as you say, that was the hardest part of getting, like, flying it, and then when I read that with you, I was just like, oh my God, that you started like an hour of just, oh my God. And then landing, because that was really hard as well. But for you, you land, and is that one you go, whew, I need a stiff drink, or what was the thought when you
that would have
put it
been
on the ground?
nice. Unfortunately, we were under what we call General Order Number 1, and we were not allowed to have those stiff drinks. It was like, it's just such a huge feeling of relief to be back on the ground, back with my team, hearing their voices, their words over the radio. They were lining the runway waiting for me to come home, and to see them, like, it was very overwhelming in many ways. And then to hop out of the airplane and kind of look at the damage, and just really shocking at the amount of damage the airplane took and then could still keep flying. I think it was a sense of like shock of like, wow, I just did that. There had been 3 manual reversion landings before mine in Operation Desert Storm. And sadly, we lost a pilot on the first one. He was killed when he crashed on landing. The second attempt, the pilot got the airplane on the ground, but then no brakes, no steering, swerved on and off the runway. And so that airplane was destroyed, and he was very lucky to survive. And then there was one successful manual reversion landing. So I kind of knew, I knew about these stories. I knew about their lessons. So to kind of look at it and go, I did that, and it was a hard flight back too. I think, that's the other thing. I was mentally and physically exhausted from the flight. Manual reversion is like flying the airplane on cranks and cables. So think, old school flying, like difficult, like really heavy airplane. So I was just mentally, physically exhausted, drained, but also on this crazy adrenaline high that took a long time to come down from.
So did you phone home and tell them what had happened and said, oh, I've just been involved in a bit of an incident, but I'm okay? Like how
that's pretty much exactly what I said. I didn't want to call my parents at all. I was like, no, I don't need to call them. I don't want to worry them. Social media wasn't what it is today. And so I thought, well, I'll just go home. Once I get home from the war, like, can we talk about it then? And my squadron commander was like, absolutely not. Call your parents. You can't tell them what happened. Just tell them you're okay. And so that's what I did. I woke them up at 1:00 in the morning in California and told them that I had a rough day, but I'm safe. I'm on the ground, and just, thinking about them. And my poor parents, I'm sure they were like, what just happened? My dad had actually ended up getting some early digital pictures of my airplane the next day from an academy classmate. And so, they figured out what happened pretty quickly. My husband was also deployed at the time. Thankfully, he was asleep during this mission. He was working the night shift. And so he was asleep when this happened. And thank God, because I can't imagine him. The word went out, right? It wasn't like, as soon as this happened, the word went out through all our secure chat channels of an A-10's been hit. The pilot is making her way home. So there was no doubt he would have known it was me. He knew when I was flying, he knew the schedule. So I'm grateful that he was asleep and didn't have to know about it until after he landed. And then I did call him because he was sleeping. I got in touch with an intel officer in his unit. And I said, well, just, have him give me a call. So he wrote him a little note. It said, hey, your wife got hit over Baghdad today, but she's okay. You should call her. So we eventually talked.
For that, Kim, like I'm trying to think now you're a mum. Like imagine you getting that call of what you gave to your parents.
No, no, I can't even fathom that. Right. Like, my poor parents, I can't even, because it's not like I came home after that, I was back flying missions the next day. So I think you just, I don't even know. My kids are 11 and 15 right now. So I have a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But it's, just, I can't fathom as a parent, like hearing that and seeing the pictures. I guess you just pray and say, thanks for that. Everything was okay. I'm not ready for that as a parent. Yeah. I don't want to think about that one yet.
No, it's, as I say though, it's just something that now, being as young as you were when that happened, and then now being a mum, totally different mindset now.
Oh, yeah.
And just, thinking of, Wow, that's actually, I've got to tell my parents that, yeah, we had a bit of an incident, but we're okay. But yeah,
We're
just,
okay. Like,
yeah.
I'm okay. I recently read one of the letters. I actually think it's in the book too. I think I saved it and included it in the book. Just a letter that I wrote home after that mission to my parents and my brother. And I was like, I'm okay. I'm fine. Like, these are, happy to be flying the A-10, like all upbeat and like, just trying to like convince them that everything's going to be just fine.
Absolutely. And for you, what happened to your plane? Did they keep it or what happened to it?
So they tried to fix it. They sent out an aircraft battle damage repair team to fix it, but there were quite honestly too many holes, not enough time. It was going to change the weight and balance of the aircraft to repair all the holes. So maintenance did what every good maintenance officer does, and they took every piece and part out of the airplane that they could to use as spare parts. And then they kindly gave me the stick from the airplane. I've got a few pieces of the airplane, so they sadly had to ship it home in a crate. And it has since been used. It was in our Air Force boneyard for a while. Then it was in, they were doing some stress testing on it. And now it happens to sit on a stick, if you will, on display at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. And some of the damaged pieces are now in a few different museums. One soon to be at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. So kind of exciting. Like it never flew again, but I think it had a pretty awesome final flight and now can tell a story about its final mission.
Absolutely. And to have the stick, that's pretty cool. That's a cool,
It is pretty cool, I have to admit.
memento. So, and for that day, you were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. And what does that award mean to you, Kim? Because as you say, it's not just tragically one of the guys was killed and in the maneuver of getting it landed. And so what does that award mean to you now?
I mean, humbling is the word that comes to mind, I think, because I know of the pilots that have, other pilots that have received the Distinguished Flying Cross. And it's such an honor. I remember being awarded the medal, and we were back in our home base in the United States, and they called all of us into the kind of main briefing room, maintenance and pilots, and just to stand there in front of everyone and, hearing the citation being read about our, how we provided close air support and then recovering the damaged airplane. It's very overwhelming in many ways of like, I don't know. I think you question a little bit like, did I earn this? Like, did I do that? I just look at like all of the other A-10 pilots, like so many amazing missions and stories from that deployment. And I'm just, I think humbled to be part of that group, just in many ways, I was just doing my job, right? It's what any other A-10 pilot would do. So it is very humbling. And, I also feel grateful that they believed in me to present the award and to put me in for the award. But yeah, humbling. And because I know the people that came before me.
Absolutely. And so you deploy again after you have what is just a crazy incident in Iraq. You deploy again to Afghanistan and over the years, and talk me through how it was changed from when you were there in 2002, and were the missions different, and how was the war going at that point?
Yeah, I think, now 2005, right now, I'm not just a wingman, I'm a flight lead, I'm an instructor in the airplane. Like I am at the peak of my flying career in terms of like, I now feel very good in the airplane, very confident. One of the top kind of time-wise instructors with experience in the squadron. And, so feeling very good about like pretty awesome to lead now a two-ship in formation and in combat. And now we have some new weapons, we have some new technology on our airplane. But also, times have changed in Afghanistan. Bagram Air Base has gone from like this place where we were staying in these, first when I was there in 2002, we're like in a tent with crew chiefs and pilots, men, women, or I guess just me and all the other men, like all together. And then we show up in Afghanistan in 2005 and there's a Burger King and like it's a huge base and there's all these people from all different countries, which is actually pretty cool as well. There was some of that in 2002 as well, but just a dramatically different environment, but very similar missions in some way. We did a lot of convoy escort. We did a lot of special forces operations at night. But now I have a different responsibility, right? Like I'm in charge of these missions. I'm leading these things. And so, in that way, I'm loving my job because again, this is what I've been trained to do.
So for you go on and have multiple deployments, and looking back now, Kim, and we'll get to the next part of your career, but looking back now with the way that Iraq and Afghanistan ended, looking back now, in your opinion, was it all worth it?
Oh, that question. I think what's worth it. I think, when I think of this question, I think about like, right, there's so many, like there were highs from those deployments and there were lows, right? The highs were the camaraderie, the doing exactly what we were trained to do, what we were asked to do. I think we did that incredibly well. Like, and I'm talking across the board, ground troops, pilots, whatever your role was, like we did what we were asked to do. We did it well. We made a difference in the time that we were there. I think that's all we can look at. Like otherwise, it becomes depressing and disappointing, right? Because you look at the loss of life. We had fatalities in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and like, you lose friends, you lose teammates. And I think that's the hard part when you go, gosh, was it worth it? But like, I know the friends that I lost, like, I know they died doing what they believed in for their brothers and sisters on the ground and in the air. So I struggle with that question in many ways because I like to believe that we made a difference in the time that we were there. And, is there a struggle? Is there things that are not great now? Absolutely. Do I wish it was different? Yes. But I have to look back on it and go, we did what we were asked to do. We did a good job with what we were asked to do, and we made a difference.
And I think that's a really great way to look at that as well, Kim, is because you joined because you wanted to serve and you wanted to, and I think, and being a first responder myself, I know exactly it's a call to serve others. And at that time you were called, you wanted to serve and you wanted to serve your country, which you did distinguishedly. And I think it's something that all veterans and first responders have, is that we all have a willingness to help others. And that's what it was. And I think that is such a great way to look at it because, you did, for the people on the ground, you gave them stability for 20 years. You gave them a chance to go to school, and that's, you got to look at the positives more so than the negative side, because as you know, war is a dirty business. It is not and there's no winners. There is no real winner in war. It's just that you got to look at the positives, and absolutely you guys did a fantastic job. And I can tell you from being an Australian and all, we're proud of our service personnel and proud of what you did as well, Kim. So absolutely, thank you for what you guys have done for us, because you not just in that country but also around the world, you protect the freedoms that we all love.
And we do it for our brothers and sisters, right? We do it for each other. We all, it's like we signed up to serve because we believed in it. We believed in what we were doing. And I think for me, especially as an A-10 pilot, like I know that I saved lives. I know that I did. I know that I helped people get home to their families. Sorry.
No, you're right. You're right.
I think, I got a note from a daughter who said, she sent me a note and she said, my dad is alive today because of you. Like, that's it, right? That's what it's about. That's what service is about. Whether you're a first responder or military, like that's why we do it. So that's what I fall back on. Like, that's what I look to, is the goodness in that. And then I try not to focus on any of the other stuff.
Absolutely. And I thank you for being vulnerable, Kim. I really do. It's something that is, it is. You look at absolutely. It's you save lives, and that's if you can do that in life, that's what we're all here for, is to, and we'll get into your book shortly, and we'll talk about your book. But after your deployments, where did your career take you after you finished flying and deployments had stopped? Where did you then move forward in your career to?
Yeah, what's crazy is everything we've talked about happened in like the first 5 to 10 years of my career. And I spent 24 years in the Air Force. I kept flying the A-10 for another 15 years after that. And but I got the opportunity to go be a leader and to fill leadership roles. I was commander of a squadron of about 150 people, went on to become a group commander of about 1,000 people, in charge of our airmen all throughout South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, which was fantastic, totally different from the Middle East. But I found that I loved taking care of our young airmen. I was passionate about leadership. I went back to the Air Force Academy. Once I finished flying the A-10, I went back to the Air Force Academy where my career began, right? Full circle moment. I went back and taught for a few years in the Military and Strategic Studies Department, and then finished out my career as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development, just helping to inspire this next generation of leaders, which was really cool. And then retired in 2021. Incredible, looking back on it. There's always some highs and some lows, but zero regrets. Like, I absolutely loved what I did.
As you said, the girl that dreamed at 10 years old to be an astronaut went through and had an amazing career. And I think, looking back for you, was it that you would go, wow, did I actually do that? Was that me? Did I do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes now I'm like, gosh, did I really do those things? Like, it's almost surreal in many ways. And, would I still love to be an astronaut? Yeah, absolutely. Don't get me wrong. That little goal is still there. But I found that I love flying the A-10 and I wasn't ready to stop. And there was a point in my life where I had to make that decision, and I chose to keep flying the A-10.
So for you, talk me through your last flight. What was that like going up, and when was that?
So it was in 2018, and I was assigned at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base out in Arizona. And I will tell you, my last flight, I mean, there's a little bit of sad, but it was awesome. It was so much fun. I led a 4-ship of A-10s. I got to pick everybody that I flew with. They were all guys from my first squadron that I had flown with back in 2003. I had known them for a very long time, and we went out to the range, and we were all instructors. So we got, I think the highest we got was maybe 1,000 feet just in the pattern. But after that, we were down at 100 feet, raging around through the terrain, over, down through the valleys, over the terrain, and only popping up to shoot the gun, and just, a really fun, meaningful mission. And then came back up initial. And I just remember coming up initial, leading this 4-ship of A-10s up initial, how badass is this? What an amazing career. The things that I've been able to do. You have a little bit of that, thinking through that as you're coming back, and landing for the first time or landing for the last time was a little sad, but also time for the next chapter. And then you pull into the parking spot, friends, family get hosed down. It's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. And as you say, that first feeling of when you first get up to the last time you come down is you're always a flyer. You're always going to be a flyer. It's in your DNA. But yeah, just a really special moment. And you mentioned that you discharged in 2021. And for you, after 24 years, was that a hard process for you? And because we were in COVID, and for you, did you find it hard to find purpose after being in the Air Force for so long?
Well, I attempted retirement 3 times, and I kept getting called back in by the Air Force, and it was still my decision, but I agreed to stay. So I had thought about it for a while, but my kids, I have 2 boys, and at the time they were fairly young, and trying to have a husband and a wife, both colonels, both in command roles, was pretty taxing on our family. And we just hit the point where it felt like it was the right decision for us. And we loved Colorado, kind of back to the outdoors where I started. But love the outdoors, felt like this was a great place to kind of finish out our career, close to the Air Force Academy, to stay here and continue some mentorship in that way. But it is a hard decision. I mean, this is all I had done for 24 years. I felt very, there was such just the uniform in itself was such an identifiable feature of my life. There's always this pull to serve, and so how do I find that on the outside? That was my biggest struggle. Like, well, how can I find something to have a purpose and a passion, to feel so strongly about something? Where do I find that? And I realized that I have found it. It's different. I miss the people, right? I miss the camaraderie of a fighter squadron for sure. But I think we can find passion and purpose in our next chapter as well. It'll be different. And that's the hardest part, is just adjusting to that difference. But I guess the good news for me is that I finished out my career doing leadership development, and I found how much I love that. And it made it for an easier transition for me to focus on leadership development in this next chapter.
So, Kim, knowing what you know now and all that you've been through, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self, and would she listen?
She may not listen. Depends. I think the advice would be, don't be so hard on yourself. Because I was very hard on myself. I held myself to very high standards. Perfectionism came to mind in my early days. I realized later on, throughout life and facing mistakes and failures, that perfection is not a real thing. And so to give yourself some grace, right, when things don't go your way, and to recognize that in those hard moments, right, at the lowest of lows, we can come out stronger on the other side, right? Like, the hardest things we go through, I think, sometimes make us the strongest. In the moment, it feels painful. It feels, overwhelming. If we can get through that, then I think we generally come out stronger and a better person on the other side. I think if I look back on my career at the hardest things I've done, that is where I have become the strongest. Those things have made me who I am today. They've made me a better, certainly a better pilot, but a better parent, a better wife. I feel like in the moment as an 18-year-old, you don't realize how good some of those hard things can be for you. So don't be so hard on yourself and give yourself some grace. Would I listen? I don't know.
So, as you mentioned, leadership, you went into leadership roles, and it's a real passion of yours. And as you know, leadership can be a lonely road. What advice could you give to any younger person who takes on a leadership role?
I think, the best part is, for me, has been learning from others. And so I think, it can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be, right? To find your wingman, if you will, right? Find people on your team that, that you can, and maybe it's not your team, maybe it's an external team, but like, find somebody that, a mentor, somebody that you can talk to, another leader in your organization that you can have a conversation with about how would you deal with this situation, or what did you do when this happened? I mean, we as squadron commanders, we talked amongst each other to figure out how to deal with things. Somebody's likely been through it. And so finding that, finding people that you can reach out to and rely on, so it isn't so lonely. I also had the incredible benefit of, on the teams where I was a commander, is I had these incredible enlisted officers that worked for me. I had a chief in my role as a commander. So the highest enlisted level, he wasn't afraid to shut the door and kind of talk to me about like, hey, I got a little feedback for you. Like, you always want to get feedback. You want to be constantly learning and growing, and know that you don't know all the answers, right? That you need to be open to ideas and open to feedback. So I think that can be very powerful, especially for young leaders, especially when you're starting out. Do not think you know it all, because you don't.
I think there's a good lesson in that, we learn life lessons every day until the day we die, Kim. So I think the moment you say there's nothing I can learn from today, is, yeah, that's just, it's arrogance in its own right, because there is always something that we can always strive to get better every day.
Absolutely.
So for you, Kim, what life lessons have you taken away from the military that you now use and pass on to your kids now?
There are many. One of the things that one of the lessons that we have learned, especially as fighter pilots, is every mission ends with a debrief. Every mission, no matter how good it is or how bad it is, it ends with a debrief. And this goes on from like learning the lessons, right? Is no matter how good you do, there's always something that probably could be done better, right? And the mistakes, you don't want to let the mistakes just eat at you. You want to actually think through, why did I make that mistake? What caused that? What lessons do I learn? And what am I going to do differently the next time? So this debrief that I've used throughout my flying career, I used it as a leader to have a debrief. If we had, something didn't go well or according to plan, whatever it was, we would debrief, have an after action. I use it with my kids, on the soccer field after a game, we do a quick debrief, right? Hey, how did that go? What do you think you did well? Without being like, I try to have them come up with the things versus me. It usually goes better that way. But I think for me, that debrief and how do we learn from our mistakes and failures? How can we get back up again when we get knocked down? I think, like I said, there were some tremendous highs and some tremendous lows, but we've got to be able to learn from them. So how do we do it? We learn by having a debrief, by having an after action, whatever it is, a quick team huddle, a debrief at the dinner table, whatever it takes. It's an opportunity to learn.
Absolutely. And I think too, it's a great point you touch on there, is that we learn from, sometimes our greatest lessons come from our greatest failures. And it's like sometimes success, it doesn't really teach you anything. It just says, okay, that was a successful mission, or that was, you succeeded at that, but through my own personal journey, Kim, I know my greatest failures have turned into my greatest successes. And I said it to a friend of mine the other day, they were a little bit younger than me. And I said, like, she lost and she was very angry and upset. And I said, look, if you can lose gracefully, I said, that is, sometimes that's better than winning, because there's always going to be a winner and a loser. And absolutely right. And like you say with your kids with their soccer is, yeah, there is going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser, but what lessons do we take away from that? And that's great advice. And I think sometimes it's forgotten in life now.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we get so busy and caught up in things, but it's worth taking even just a few minutes to reflect and figure out what lessons can we learn? What are we going to do differently the next time?
Absolutely. And so for you, what are your plans going forward, Kim, with your family into the future?
I think the biggest thing for me with my kids being so young is that, I did miss out on some time with them while I was in service. I mean, I deployed at times and that was hard. And so for me, going forward, it's all about quality time and being present and going to soccer games and, whatever it is that they're doing to be a part of that. That's really important to me. I think my husband and I, we've spent plenty of time apart in our career. And so we're all about being together and having good quality time and doing those things that we want to do. And, not taking life for granted. I think when you have a life altering moment, a moment where you think you may not survive, it puts things into perspective a little bit. And we really try to focus on what's most important to us.
A great way to, I really like that, in that, yeah, life is precious and short, and we're only here a short time, and we need to make the most of it. And absolutely. And how do people get in contact with you, Kim, if they do want to reach out? How do they get in contact with you?
Yeah. So my website has links to all the social media, which is kim-kc-campbell.com. But certainly you can also reach out on X and Instagram, KCHAWG 987. So that's KC Hog.
Yes.
And that I flew. 987 was the tail number. So there's the reasoning behind that. LinkedIn, Kim Casey Campbell as well. But I would say, please reach out. Like if you have a question that we didn't talk about or something that you want to know further, I love when people reach out.
Absolutely. And well, I want to touch on this because I want to we're nearly getting towards the end, and I want to tie this off. And you published your first book, flying in the face of fear, a fighter pilot's lessons on leading and courage in 2023. Congratulations, well done. And I'm a fellow author too, so I know how hard it is to get a book published.
Yes.
And so, what was that like for you? Talk me through the writing process, and was it a cathartic process for you?
It really was. I never thought about being an author. Like that wasn't on my to-do list. It wasn't a dream of mine. It was just honestly, I was teaching at the Air Force Academy at the time, a fellow instructor who sat in on one of my classes. He had been an Army Ranger, turned PhD. And he walked out of the class and he said, you have a lot of stories and lessons that you share. You should put those in a book. And I kind of laughed him off, to be honest. I was like, yep, whatever. I'm not an author. And he said, no, I'm serious. I'll take your first chapter in December. And December is a time when the cadets go home. So it's pretty quiet. And I was like, all right, I'll humor you, like I'll do this. So I just started writing, which I think is backwards in the way that they teach you, right? Usually you should have like a structure and an outline. And I just started writing. So in many ways, it was very cathartic. It also meant that I threw a lot of it away, put it in the bin because I didn't have that structure. But in many ways, it was so fun to go back and like open up pictures. And I read all these letters that I had sent to my parents as when I was going through the Air Force Academy. I found emails that I had sent my parents on deployments, and it really brought me back to the moment. And I actually did go back and listen to my mission. I listened to the audio, and to hear that again, brought it all back in many ways. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad I did it. Right. It was, as you know, it is very difficult, and to get it to a point where I felt confident in publishing it. I don't know if it's ever perfect, right? There's the perfectionism piece, but it's never going to be perfect. Right. So you get it out there, you get it into the world. Is the message is, I guess what I'm proud of is that the message is what I wanted to share. I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to share a different view, provide a different perspective about leadership, about life. Not everybody's going to be a fighter pilot. Not everybody's going to go fly in combat and get hit with a surface to air missile. But I think there's so many good lessons from that. And that's what I want to share. That's what I want to connect with people about.
Absolutely. And I was laughing because I did exactly the same. I didn't have a structure. I just wrote, and in the end I went, actually I need some help here. This is just not working. And
Yes.
But no, I laughed because yeah, absolutely. And I know the process, and I know how hard it is, and there's a lot of self-doubt comes into your mind when you're sitting there going, well, who's going to read my story, and who do you think you are to write a book? And you probably, and I think most or almost every author goes through exactly the same thing of going, who's going to read this? Only my parents, or
I hope somebody's going to read it, right? All this work.
Exactly.
I always joked with my husband. I was like, gosh, I'm going to get this book done, and then am I going to have the courage to publish it? And he just kind of laughed at me. He's like, take your own advice. Hence the book, Lessons on Leading with Courage, right? You do those things that make you uncomfortable because they're the right things to do. But it is hard to put yourself out there. It feels very vulnerable.
Absolutely. And so for you finish your time in the Air Force, and what are you doing now? I understand you're doing a lot in the leadership space and also motivational speaking. And how has that been for you going into that space?
It's really been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. I love the opportunity to connect with people. I get to travel all over the United States, and a few other countries as well. I've had a little bit of that, which has been really fun. I love to travel, and I love going to different teams and organizations. And we're talking, these aren't just CEOs. We're talking everything from construction workers, aviation, finance, business, whatever it is. Messages about teamwork and leadership are consistent. And so I think it's just been so incredibly heartwarming to see the response and to connect with people, and to see like when they say, I never thought about it that way, or that's a great way to look at it. Like just helping somebody on their journey has been incredibly rewarding, right? When we talk about finding in that passion and purpose again, I've absolutely loved that.
Absolutely. And so, Kim, looking back now with 24 years of serving your country, was joining the Air Force still the best decision you've made, apart from having kids and getting married?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who knew this little girl at 10 years old who had this dream but didn't really know what she was getting into. I look back now and what an amazing, so many opportunities, certainly challenges, ups, downs, highs, lows. But like I said, it all made me who I am today. I loved my time in service. I absolutely love the opportunity to serve my country, to serve our ground troops. Like, I just feel like it was an important part of my life. And I think, service in whatever way works for you is important, even if it's, service to a charity, service as a first responder, whatever it is. I think in some way, if we can serve others and help others, like, not only like for me, it brings me joy as well. It makes like I've really enjoyed so much of that. But I think we really, it helps us to become stronger. It helps us to learn from others. It's this idea, right? We never stop learning. We never stop growing. We're serving others and we're learning from them along the way as well.
Absolutely. And great. I think it's a really great way to tie off the podcast. And there's a quote, Kim, that I want to finish with, that I believe sums up your story. And Kim, you've served your country with honor and brought pride to your family. Your story is one of true grit, determination, never giving up. And the quote is, your wings already exist. All you have to do is fly, believe you can, and you are already halfway there. To most people, the sky is the limit. To those who love aviation, the sky is home. Kim, I really believe this quote sums up your story, and it's been an absolute honor and a privilege to have you on True Blue Conversations and share your story. So, Kim Campbell, DFC, thank you for coming on True Blue Conversations.
Thank you so much, Adam. I appreciate it.
Raise your glasses, podcasters. This episode of True Blue Conversations is brought to you by Wet Canteen Bottling Company, the perfect way to commemorate and celebrate life's most special occasions. Elevate your moments, savor the taste, and make them truly unforgettable with Wet Canteen. Head on over to wetcanteenbottlingco.com.au and use the code TRUEBLUE for your exclusive discount. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.